Hi everyone, this is Miss Seacrest. Welcome to part 2 of our Introduction to Poetry. Hopefully you all just finished Mr. Nolasco's Introduction to Poetry Part 1, where he talked to us about figurative language and how to structure poems. So in this video we're going to talk about poetic devices and look at a few examples of different types of poetry. So let's start with poetic devices. What do we mean? Well, poets use different tricks, techniques, or devices to establish rhythm and create sound within their poems. So let's look at a few types of poetic devices. The first is really basic, and it's one that you all already know: rhyme. So rhyme are sounds that repeat at the end of words, such as, "Behind the screen was a world of green." As we can see here, our two rhyming words, screen and green, fall at the end of these two lines of poetry. So we call this end rhyme. Pretty easy, right? Let's look at another example. Peter, Peter, pumpkin eater, ate a piece of pie. Okay. Well, our two rhyming words Peter and eater both fall within the same line of poetry. We call this internal rhyme because they're inside the same line instead of being at the end of two lines over here. Let's look at another device, which we call meter. Meter is a smooth, fixed pattern of syllables or beats that are either accented or unaccented. And this is used to create rhythm. So what do I mean? Let's look at an example of a part of a poem with meter. He came upon an age beset by grief, by rage. Listen to that rhythm. He came upon an age beset by grief, by rage. The poet has put together these two lines of poetry so that it has that natural rhythm, and we call that natural pattern our meter. This is how we mark our meter. We use this to signal unaccented syllables, and this line to signal accented syllables. So let's look at this. Beset by grief, by rage. If I read this line and said, beset by grief, by rage, you would know instinctively that that was wrong. And the reason that's wrong is that this poet has designed these two lines to flow with the way we naturally speak, to create this particular rhythm. So keep in mind, meter is a pattern created out of beats and syllables to create a certain type of rhythm. And we will be practicing recognizing meter and labeling it more as a class. Our next poetic device is repetition. Pretty simple. Repetition being how we repeat a sound, word, or phrase for emphasis. Let's look at an example. Then look for me by moonlight. Watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight. We repeat this word moonlight over and over and over because that's what the poet wants to stick in your mind. He's using it for emphasis. Our next poetic device is called alliteration. Alliteration is when we repeat sounds at the very beginning of words, such as this. Sally sells seashells at the seashore. Do you hear that alliteration? We hear that S sound repeated. Sally sells seashells at the seashore, over and over and over. Similarly, I fell on the phone. I fell on the phone. Here you can see it's actually a different letter, but the sound spoken out loud is the same. We call that repetition of that first initial sound alliteration. Our next poetic device is called onomatopoeia. So onomatopoeias are words whose sound actually imitates the actual sound that it refers to. Another way of thinking of that is using a word whose sound suggests its meaning, like pow, or swoosh, or buzz, or boom, or clink. all of those words actually sound like what they mean. We call that onomatopoeia. What's next? Well, we've looked at some poetic devices, some ways that poets create sound and rhythm within their poems. So now let's look at some different types of poems. The first we're going to look at is called a limerick. Limericks originally originated in Ireland. They are rhymed, rhythmic, composed of 5 lines, and often they are humorous. You can tell that something's going to be a limerick if it starts with, "There once was a," etc. Let's look at an example. There once was a student named Daisy who thought all those poets were crazy, but she gave it a shot, gave it all that she got. Now she drops rhymes just like she were Jay-Z. So what do we notice? Well, it's 5 lines. It's humorous. It starts with "there once was a," and we notice this very specific rhyme scheme that we often see with limericks. The first 2 lines rhyme, the 3rd and 4th lines rhyme with each other, and then the 5th line rhymes with the first 2. And you'll see that repeated over and over. And that's how you recognize a limerick. What's next? A haiku. Haikus come from Japan originally, but now they're written all over the world. These are poems, usually or often about nature, that are composed of just three, unrhymed lines. The first line has 5 syllables, the second 7, and the third, again, 5 syllables. Here we go. An old silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash. Silence again. By Basho. So, is this a haiku? Let's look. Well, it's about nature. The first line has an old silent pond, 5 syllables. The second line has a frog jumps into the pond, 7 syllables. And the third line has splash, silence again, 5 syllables. So yep, we have a haiku. Actually, Basho is one of the world's most famous, all-time famous haiku poets. Okay, what is a ballad? A ballad is what we call a narrative poem, or it tells a story. Ballads have rhyme, they have rhythm. Some even have what we call a refrain, like a chorus to a song that repeats throughout the poem. And some ballads are sung. In fact, ballads started as ways that a certain groups of people could remember their history by singing their stories to each other and passing that along down the generations. So let's look at a famous ballad. It's called Casey at the Bat by Ernest Lawrence Thayer. Actually, these 3 stanzas are just the first of a way longer poem that has several more stanzas, but this is just a taste. So let's look. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville 9 that day. The score stood 4-2 with but 1 inning more to play. And then when Cooney died at first and Barrows did the same, a pall-like silence fell upon the patrons of the game. A straggling few got up to go in deep despair. The rest clung to the hope which springs eternal in the human breast. They thought, if only Casey could get a whack at that, we'd put up even money now with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, as also did Jimmy Blake, and the former was a hoodoo while the latter was a cake. So upon that stricken multitude grim melancholy sat, for there seemed but little chance of Casey getting to the bat. So what characteristics of a ballad do we see, even in these first 3 stanzas? Well, the first is, it tells a story. We're hearing about a baseball game, the last inning, wondering if this great hitter is going to get a chance to tie the game. Also, we have rhymes. Day, play, same, game, etc. And we know that ballads have rhyme and rhythm. So those 2 things show us that this is an example of a ballad. Okay, let's get one thing straight once and for all. Poems do not have to rhyme. Poems that don't rhyme are called free verse. They don't have a rhyme scheme and they may not even have a meter, but that's completely fine. We just call that free verse. Poets who want to write in free verse use other poetic devices to create meaning. They might use repetition. Some of our figurative language examples use form to indicate that it's a poem. They have lots of options. They don't just need to use rhyme. Let's look at this poem together. It's called Thrill Ride. Up, up, click, click. Wind blows sharp in my ears. My heart jumps, skips. It's up higher. It's up, up the highest. Hands grasp at the clouds. Then a forever pause, still, waiting. Finally, whoosh, steep down, 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 down. So, let's look. Does this poem rhyme like the other poems we've looked at? Up, click, blows, ears, skips, higher? Nope, no rhyme here. So, we know this is a poem in free verse. But there actually are still several poetic devices here that show us that it's a poem. First, look at it. Its form is clearly in a poetic structure, with stanzas broken up and not written all across the page as you would see in prose or novels or stories. Second of all, there's a lot of poetic devices here. How about repetition? Up, up, click, click. Or up, up here, down, down, down. I also see a metaphor. My heart jumps, skips. Is this person's heart really skipping? Is it skipping across like we would skip across a sidewalk? No, but it feels like it's skipping because she's so nervous. What about an onomatopoeia? Whoosh! That's the sound a roller coaster makes as it drops. So we know whoosh is a word that sounds like the word it's describing. Whoosh. So this is a poem, and it's a poem in free verse. And this poet didn't need rhyme to create meaning. She used lots of different poetic devices and form to convey that. Well, thank you for watching our second part of our introduction to poetry. It's very important that now that this video is finished, you go back to Blackboard and take the quiz that's posted on Google Docs. The link will be right below the link to these two videos. See you in class.